Last Stop by the Prowler. The bright neon sign caught my attention from the highway. It read, The Last Stop, Speakeasy and Restaurant, flashing in its purple and blue hue. I've been driving for days, it had seemed. What the hell? I'll get off this highway and get something to eat and drink, and just relax my bones for a bit. I pulled into the parking lot and parked near the front doors of the establishment. I scanned the lot as I got out of the car and noticed a few scattered cars here and there, but it wasn't busy. The warm hum from the neon sign hit my ears as I entered through the thick wooden doors. My eyes had to adjust to the darkened bar room from the bright glow of the neon outside. As I made my way past the burgundy upholstered booths to get to one of the seats at the bar. As I took my seat, I scanned the room. The bar was surrounded by several booths that wrapped around the entire room, and on each table of each booth sat a small lamp that illuminated the area with a soft, gentle glow of intimate ambiance. The ceiling was made of copper, with engravings etched into each sheet, like an old-timey speakeasy, while the walls were wallpapered in maroon and gold trimming. From what I could see, there might have been 10 people in the room, scattered throughout, a few around the bar, with the rest occupying multiple booths, including a few couples. As I finished getting a feel of my surroundings, the bartender approached, greeting me and asking if I'd like something to eat and drink. His appearance matched the establishment. They were really going all out with this old-time speakeasy ambiance in this place. I asked for a Jack and Coke to start, and a menu. I was very hungry. Like I said, it had seemed like I was on that highway driving for days. I definitely needed a little rest and a drink, and a proper meal was exactly what I needed. While I waited, I nonchalantly looked around the room, trying to get a better look at some of the people around me, without trying to seem nosy, but I couldn't really get a proper look. The ambiance was dark and smoky. If it wasn't for the soft glow from the lamps on the tables, I wouldn't know if the couples who occupied these booths had faces at all. The people at the bar, however, I could see a little more clearer. Well, the 2 gentlemen to the left of me, to be more exact. The others across the bar, I really couldn't make out either. It was strange, though. The 2 men who sat next to me seemed to match the old-timey aesthetic that the establishment was portraying. They were dapper, dressed from a bygone era, Victorian by the looks of it. White-collared dress shirts, covered by a fancy vest, with a tie tucked underneath. Gold pocket watches tucked inside their vest pockets. The gleam from their gold cufflinks shined in my eyes as they moved their wrists as they talked to each other. And placed next to each gentleman on top of the bar was a neatly folded dress coat with a top hat and walking stick resting on top. The bartender returned, whose name was Davison, by the way, and placed my drink and menu before me. Smooth jazz began to play throughout the room as I flipped through the menu. After a few minutes of perusing the establishment's offerings, I settled on the tavern burger and fries. I'm a simple man, after all. I gave my order to Davison, and as I did so, the Victorian-looking gentleman to my left began to complain of the jazz music that was playing, calling it the devil's music. They complained to Davison, asking him to turn it off. "What's wrong, gents? You don't like the tunes?" he said sarcastically. "This is something that could only have been composed by Beelzebub himself. It's an affront to my sensories. Play the classics, my good man. Something from the harpsichord, perhaps. A sonata from Beethoven or Mozart, the great Chopin. Anything other than this drivel, replied the gentleman with the fine mustache. I looked closer at the two gentlemen, and as I did, I realized that they looked oddly familiar, but I couldn't put my finger on it. My thoughts were distracted by Davison as he placed the burger and fries down in front of me, accompanied with a side of ranch, and like a flip of a switch, my thoughts went from sleuthing to how delicious the food was. I was quite enjoying my meal when complaints from the two men started up again, but this time Davison addressed them by their names, and when I heard them, a light bulb went off in my head. He called them Nigel and Neville. Holy shit! Two gentlemen in Victorian garb, with those names and those faces? That's Neville and Nigel Burlington. That's the Prowler and Jack the Ripper, sitting right there next to me, I thought. But how could this be? They died well over 100 years ago. I sat there in disbelief, deep in thought, wondering what the hell could be going on. I know it wasn't Halloween. Maybe these gents were coming or going to a costume party. Yeah, that's it. That has to be the answer. I could hear Davison say, "Everything okay, Jim? It looks like you've seen a ghost," breaking my concentration. "No, everything is fine, Davison. I'm okay. Just dealing with a slight case of indigestion, I think," I replied with trepidation. "Well, you have," he said to me stone-faced. "I have what?" I replied in a shocked, inquisitive tone. "Seen a ghost, Jim. I saw you staring at those two gentlemen, and the instant look of fright and dread that washed over your face when you realized who the gentlemen were." He answered in the most smuggest of tones, like a secret he'd been waiting to reveal since the moment I first stepped foot inside. I couldn't believe what he was telling me here. Ghosts? Really? But sure enough, right after he said it, the two gentlemen looked over at me and introduced themselves. "Nigel and Neville Burlington, at your service," they said as they raised their glasses in my direction. I looked at Davison in disbelief, asking him what in the hell was going on here, who he was, and what is this place. He smiled and said, "I'm Davison, the proprietor of this fine establishment, the last stop. But I must confess, this isn't an ordinary speakeasy and restaurant." As he said this, I could hear the people scattered throughout the room behind me get up from their seats, and as they gathered around me is when he continued, "What makes this establishment different from others is we're all dead here. It isn't hell, but it's a type of purgatory, a stopover before you're chosen for your eternal destination." Wait a minute, I thought. Purgatory? That means I'm... Before I could utter the word, Davison did. "Dead," he said with a raised voice. He stood there looking at me for a moment. "Don't tell me you don't remember your death. It just happened earlier tonight. It should be fresh in your mind, my boy. A horrible, nasty accident just a couple miles down the highway. But I'll tell you what, with the cargo you were carrying with you in your trunk, you're going to be with us here for quite some time. And when you're done, don't expect to be going to heaven." My head was spinning. I couldn't believe what I was being told. I asked what I was carrying in the trunk of my car, And how bad could it be that it would send me to hell? When I asked this, the Burlington brothers started to laugh. Davison then pointed to the people surrounding me and asked if any of them looked familiar. I gave them a once-over, but couldn't tell for certain if I knew any of these people. Out of nowhere, one of them offered to buy me a drink, and mistakenly, I accepted. I pounded the liquor from the shot glass down hard and fast, but once the spirits rushed down my throat, I was hit with unbelievable pain that flashed across my brain. It was a memory, the gruesome memory of how I killed that person, followed by the accident that killed me. Davison chimed in once again. Each time you drink from a drink that's offered to you from someone in this bar, you will experience the pain that your victims experienced, and you will relive the pain of your fiery death. Also, don't think you'll get out of it by not drinking, because the longer you don't drink, the longer you'll be here. So if I was you, I'd get to drinking. With your body of work, you're gonna be here a long time, no matter what. When he said that, I looked over my shoulder and noticed a line forming that started to stretch out of the building. My God, I murdered all of these people? I'm in for an unbelievable amount of pain. I don't care what Davison said. This isn't purgatory. This is hell. Just then a finger tapped me on my shoulder. Can I buy you a drink, mister? They asked pleasantly. All I could do was smile and nod yes. I grabbed the shot glass and raised it high. Bottoms up. Nahuals Revenge. Unknown author. In the heart of Mexico, nestled among the winding roads and dense forests, there was a security guard named Carlos. Carlos had taken up a job as a driver for an armored truck company, transporting valuable goods and ensuring their safe passage through treacherous routes. Little did he know that one fateful night would forever change his life. It was a moonless night, shrouded in an eerie darkness that sent shivers down Carlos's spine. He maneuvered his armored truck along the isolated road, his senses on high alert. As he focused on the path ahead, a sudden movement caught his attention. A massive owl, with piercing eyes and wings stretched wide, swooping down from the heavens. The collision was inevitable. Carlos's heart raced as the owl crashed into the armored windshield, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. In a moment of confusion, the injured owl managed to free itself from the wreckage and disappeared into the night. Carlos, bewildered by the encounter, could barely comprehend what had just transpired. Pushing forward, Carlos continued his journey, shaken by the strange incident. But fate had more sinister plans for him. Just as he thought the worst was behind him, a mile down the road, a chilling sight awaited him. A naked man emerged from the shadows, his face and body covered in blood. His eyes were vacant, devoid of any trace of humanity. Carlos slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding in his chest. The man staggered toward the truck, a haunting smile stretching across his face. Fear gripped Carlos as he realized the man was not alive. This was the vengeful spirit of the man he had accidentally killed with his truck. The ghostly apparition floated effortlessly towards Carlos, whispering indiscernible words of hatred and revenge. A creature from ancient Mexican folklore, had taken possession of the man's spirit, seeking to punish the one responsible for his untimely demise. From that moment on, Carlos lived in a constant state of terror. Every time he climbed into his armored truck, he could feel the presence of the man lurking in the back seat. Its icy breath brushed against his neck, and its malevolent gaze pierced his soul. The ghostly figure tormented Carlos relentlessly. It would whisper haunting threats, causing him to question his sanity. Sleepless nights turned into days filled with paranoia and dread. The line between the physical and the supernatural blurred. As Carlos could no longer distinguish reality from the nightmare that consumed his existence. Desperate to break free from the clutches of the vengeful Nahual, Carlos sought help from local spiritual healers and shamans. But the evil spirit proved resilient, always returning to torment its chosen prey. It seemed as though the only escape from this living nightmare was death itself. The tale of the haunted security guard and the relentless pursuit of the Nahual spread throughout the region, chilling the hearts of those who dared to listen. Carlos became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dire consequences that befall those who cross the boundary between the mortal realm and the supernatural. To this day, the armored truck sits abandoned by the roadside, its windshield shattered, and the ghostly presence of the Nahual forever lingering in the back seat. Travelers who pass by can hear the echoes of Carlos's desperate pleas for mercy, serving as a chilling reminder of the horrors that await those who encounter the wrath of the supernatural in the dark and mystical lands of Mexico. My accursed stay at Roseroot Rectory. This reporter was surprised to discover a particular postcard following Easter Sunday's edition of the Sentinel. The postcard read, "Mr. and Mrs. Dovecot cordially invite Michael Banks, chief reporter of the Sentinel, to stay one night at Roseroot Rectory, the most haunted rectory in England." With Roseroot Rectory, a faintly familiar term, a trip to the archives was the next line of inquiry. Indeed, reported in these pages, June 6, 1881, a murder, fatal blow to the head, committed on Roseroot Rectory's grounds. The female victim in question was never identified, the killer never apprehended. My curiosity roused. I arranged a stay at the rectory 1 week later. I was greeted at Roseroot by the charming Mrs. Dovecot. While showing me around the grounds, Mrs. Dovecot explained that Roseroot hadn't actually housed a clergyman for some 15 years. Mrs. Dovecot and her husband now run Roseroot as an inn. Its proximity to the River Trent, fishing rights, and notoriety as a place of supernatural wonder, ensuring ample custom. "Rose still haunts the house and gardens," Mrs. Dovecot explained, when talk turned to the murder, waiting for her killer to return. A tall tale designed to amuse Roseroot's guests. I couldn't help but wonder. And how did the good lady come to know the ghoul's name when the murder victim that allegedly spawned her was never identified? Perhaps Rose is simply a nickname assigned to the phantom because of the property. After a fine trout supper taken with the other patrons, I retired to my room. Sometime around 12 o'clock, an unidentified voice disturbed me. "They took it from a servant of the Lord," the strained voice seemed to whisper. silenced the daughter who knew. I must admit, dear readers, that I fled in fear before I could deduce the source of the words. Unless you saw the vengeful lady herself, Mr. Dovecot said, upon my rousing him, no telling whether or not what you heard was Rose's doing. As I sit writing this days later, I am still uncertain of what to think. I went hiking in the wilderness and was haunted by something hiding amongst the hills. Deleted author. I could feel the chill of winter underneath my skin. If I was warm enough, I'd have removed my shoes. I knew I had blisters on my heels. I'd felt the increasing pain of the skin being worn and torn away with every excruciating step for the last mile and a half. My shoulders were killing me. The combined weight of the broken tent, my sleeping pack, and camping equipment was perhaps a bit too much for one person to carry. Each year I put aside time for myself, away from everyone, away from everything. No distractions, no problems. I don't have to worry about council tax or the fact that the mechanical car park gates are broken again and I can't get to work for the second time this month. No modern world issues. The cold autumnal wind swept through the Lake District like an army conquering a new land. I used to hate it, but now it just feels like an old friend pushing me along. I'd been sleeping in a small one-man tent for the past 3 days, but the night before the incident, I managed to tear a massive hole in it by not properly storing it away. It got caught on a rogue thorn bush I passed through, and the tiny bush ripped through my night's protection. Luckily, around the Lake District remain old bothies. For those who don't know what a bothy is, it's a small building that remains unlocked, so people traveling through have somewhere to stay for the night in events such as mine. They aren't typically used much, as people usually have a tent, or don't really camp much in general out in the hills. Luck isn't usually on my side, but shortly after tearing my tent, I continued my walk up the peak of a hill and spotted one of these bothies sitting peacefully on top of a smaller hill just below me. Even though it was only 4 p.m. and the sun was still up, I didn't want to continue walking and risk not finding shelter again. According to my phone, I was still another 5 or 6 miles away from an inn or hotel. The bothy was old, very old, dangerously old. It was only about 4 meters high, with a mix of stone, wood, and straw acting as a makeshift roof. Thinking upon it now, that roof could have caved in if I had sneezed too hard. The door had rotted away and fallen to the floor, where over time it was slowly beginning to disintegrate and perish, as we all do. My father always used to say, "Everything is prisoner to time." That little line came to me as I entered the bothy. The pure darkness inside the bothy struck me. While I usually wouldn't have found it menacing, today I welcomed the embrace of the unknown. If no light could get in, neither could the wind or rain. I gently sat down my gear on the floor. There wasn't a huge amount of space. It had to be about 4 meters by 6 meters. I pinged open the buckle on my backpack and gently drew out my now defunct tent. I decided to pin it to the doorframe with some pegs, so at least if it did rain, the tent material would stop a majority of it from flying through the doorway. I felt very clever. I remember looking at my watch and being shocked at the fact it was now 5:30 p.m. I don't know how pinning a broken tent up had taken this much time, but it had. I cracked out my portable stove and carefully lit it. I had the usual beans and sausages out of a foil pack that night. After a day of walking, anything tasted good. I had sat back against the wall and slowly closed my eyes as I attempted to get comfy and rest for a minute before getting my sleeping bag out. I was woken up by a loud cracking from right in front of me. I woke up quite quickly, thinking someone had snuck into the bothy with me. I have had my things stolen in the past by other campers while I slept, so it wouldn't surprise me if it happened again. Like a fool, I had left the gas stove on. I felt like an idiot. I could have caused a lot of damage. I pushed against the wall behind me, and I rocked forwards onto my knees and carefully turned it off. I leaned back, sat on my knees, and let out a sigh. A small stone plopped down in front of me with a gentle tap. Silence flooded the cool air. I looked up and saw a few of the stones, making up the wall in front of me, had fallen out of position and onto the floor in front of me. It appeared to be pitch black outside, which didn't surprise me. When I saw something back away quickly from the hole and vanish, allowing moonlight to flood into the bothy, that's when I was surprised. To be honest, I was more shitting myself than just surprised. I let out a gentle scream. I pushed myself back against the wall I had been sleeping against. Something rustled at the makeshift tent door. I withered back, hands slowly released the sides of the stone doorway, and retreated back out of the structure. "Who's out there? I would appreciate you not mucking around. If you want to come in, just knock," I shouted with a veil of bravery and confidence. The stone structure shook as short, violent knocks bounced all around the outside of the bothy. It started out quietly, but quickly crescendoed to bone-shaking smashing all around the structure. I sat there wanting to be anywhere else. I miss my girlfriend. I miss my cozy bed. I miss civilization. I was fully processing the reality that I might die out in some little stone hut in the middle of nowhere. I cried and begged and pleaded. Stones expelled themselves from the walls and the ceilings, most punching me on the way down, allowing beams of light to pierce the ancient shelter. "Just let me live!" I screamed out after several minutes in one final burst of desperation. The knocking stopped abruptly. I felt air gently brush the back of my ear from one of the holes a fallen stone had left in the wall behind me. "No," whispered the overlapping voices of 100 people at once in my ear. I watched through the holes in the walls as hundreds of black shadows flew past, back and forth, around the outside of the bothy. The white light of the night was blocked by their corrupt forms flying around me. I could feel my entire body shaking. The cold had penetrated my very skeleton and frozen my very nature. Fear had quickly sunk its nails into my mind and soul. Logical thought, feeling, and sense had been cut out of me. Despair took control. I pushed myself to my feet, ignoring the searing pain from bloody heels, and quickly lunged for my makeshift tent door. I grabbed the green cloth in my hand and violently ripped it from the pegs it hung by. 100 empty figures huddled before me, one with her face almost touching mine, twilight skin slowly dripping from them, muscles displayed carelessly, jaws detached, and bones bent out of shape. The woman whose face was almost touching mine had a single glittering tear trickle down her decaying face. I looked her straight in the eye and only saw the void. With a single touch to the chest, I was thrown to the floor. My head smashed against my portable metal hob, and I lost consciousness. I awoke at about 6 a.m. The morning rain had wriggled itself between my lips and into my mouth, causing me to choke and sputter awake. I sat in a box of stones. The structure I had entered the previous evening had vanished. leaving only an outline of a few stones in the grass around me where the foundation had stood. I grabbed my portable stove and the bits I had unpacked and quickly departed. I carried most of it in my arms, caring little about things getting wet, and ran to the nearest town. A few hours later, I had managed to settle down in a nearby inn. The old woman working there had taken pity and let me in, despite my dismal appearance. The inn was cozy and quiet. A small fire danced in the fireplace, just for me and the old woman. After a warm drink and a sit by the fire, she had come over to me and asked if I was okay. She was fairly old, in her late 60s if I had to guess. I told her she wouldn't believe my story, and she sat down in the armchair opposite me and listened. I reached the end of my story, fully expecting her to disprove it with logic, or say the classic, "You must have been hallucinating, or dreaming, or you're lying." But instead I received an accepting nod. I asked her behind her casual response. She gently rubbed the bridge of her nose. She explained that I wasn't the first hiker to have come through the village traumatized by something, but I was the first to admit what I had seen in a very long time. She retailed to me a story that her great-grandfather had told her grandmother. The story goes that a woman had been chased over the hills a few centuries ago by a village of about 100. Her crime was witchcraft. There was, of course, no proper proof she was a witch. She was simply a woman who refused the advances of a male elder in the village. She also had a baby with a man who had died before the child's birth that she cared for. The child and the woman fled the village in the night, followed by the hissing horde of villagers, fueled by hatred and the thrill of the hunt. They chased the woman all night before finally cornering her in an old stone bothy. She begged for her life. She wept and screamed, begging that they let her and her child go. In response, the villagers pushed and smashed against the outside of the bothy till it collapsed in on both the woman and her baby. Both perished underneath a tomb of insignificant rocks. With that, the old woman shrugged and got up out of the armchair and gently laid her hand on my shoulder. "I don't know if that will explain anything," she let out with a sigh and sorrow in her eyes. She offered me a room for the night and a cheap meal. She said in return for the cheap meal, I would have to leave the town early the next day, interact with no one, and go home. She walked away and uttered under her breath, "I don't want them following you to my inn." I didn't think anything of the comment, but since returning to my home in the city, I've started hearing knocking. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.